US Department of Justice says it will investigate the police response to last week's mass shooting at a school in Uvalde, Texas, which killed 19 children and 2 teachers. Public anger is growing after it emerged that officers waited in the hallway as children trapped with the shooter made desperate 911 calls. Let's speak to Chris-Grollnek. He's an active shooter security expert, so perfectly placed to speak about some of the events that we have seen unfold so sadly over the past few days. How do you understand what happened and what went wrong, Chris?
Hello, Nuala. Thank you for having me. Terrible subject. There's no way to understand. No one could see the inaction of police, and there's no justification, no matter what, of why the action was not taken that should have been.
But with this, I think the most heartbreaking parts that we've been hearing over the past couple of days was from parents that, wanted officers to enter that building, that they did not. They spoke afterwards about not realizing that it was still an active shooter situation. How do you think something like that can happen?
Well, I think there's a couple different things happening here. Some of the message is getting watered down by not what you said, but what's inferred, that it wasn't an active shooter, it turned into a barricaded person. And the layman needs to understand a barricaded person is someone that robs a bank and locks themselves inside and maybe has my family hostage, and then you have to wait for the police to come and negotiate their way out. Well, an active shooter or an active killer goes in and starts actively killing people, and that's not a non-active shooting spot until the shooter stops or is stopped. You arrest them or you neutralize them, but you definitely don't go outside and start negotiating with them. And if you go backwards even further, since Sandy Hook, the Sandy Hook promise, the Department of Justice spent about $50 million at Texas State University on the Alert Center to train police. Over 144,000 police have been trained. You locate, find, and stop the shooter. That's your first priority when you show up. Incident commander or not, real-time intelligence are the gunshots that are coming. And we have seen, after spending $50 million in 10 years to shoot these, there are several instances, and this is no different, where the police failed to go inside. So you can invest in response ad nauseum, but it doesn't mean that people are going to respond appropriately. And I think it's time for an honest question and dialogue about adding some things like prevention, response, and options to do both. So
what would that look like? Because when you talk about training, I did see in 2020 the city of Uvalde's police SWAT team, they toured the school campuses to interact with the students in case of an emergency, as according to their Facebook post. The department's 2018 annual report said the SWAT unit had monthly tactical training sessions open to all officers to attend. So it looks like from some of those details that they were putting, training in place to be able to deal with an incident like this. So what is the aspect that doesn't work, as you say, with other incidents that you feel this has also happened?
Well, I think we have to go down to the original thing that went wrong. I mean, it's not going to take a DOJ investigation to understand the building was hardened. They had a lot of money spent on facility management.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. They had glass that had film on it that was ballistic. Their doors were hardened. They had a security system of access control. They had cameras, all the things that you'd want to see to start an initial hardening of a building. The problem is all that doesn't work if you prop a door open. And they actually propped the door open, and the shooter was able to come in and make that fortified castle his last stand, and it worked against the police. Unfortunately, the police waited 14 minutes before taking action to even try to, there are so many little minute details. There's no explanation. If they would have followed active shooter protocols, which is what's taught through Alert for police, for response, the shooter would have been either neutralized earlier or they would have tried to find him earlier. But that many departments responding in unison with different training, different levels of experience, different mindsets, and no one went in because somebody gave an order not to, well, I would consider that an illegal order. As if we were in combat and somebody said, shoot this unarmed person because I don't like them, that'd be an illegal order. So wouldn't it work in the reverse, that if I say, don't stop this person from executing these little children, that would be an illegal order? You should go in and do anything you can to stop that shooting, no matter what.
Yeah, it's such a difficult time in the United States. Dahlia, you are there today, and no doubt those repercussions still very much being felt, even though you are in New York and this took place in Texas. There's so much soul searching. How do you see this incident, particularly picking up on Chris, that I suppose that human error of propping open that door, also that the police were not in unison in thinking of what was the right actions to take place?
Yeah. First of all, let me remind you that no place is immune, because just the previous week there was a shooting in Buffalo in New York State, and the public here was still reeling from that. And the very week after that, there was a shooting in the subway in New York. Nobody is immune from this. Now, I want to pick up on what Chris said. Of course, this is a very legitimate and serious professional analysis we need to have about how the police may or may not have behaved correctly, or it sounds like they really didn't. But the focus on this, if this becomes the center of the debate, I think it will be nothing less than tragic. It is shifting the responsibility for this issue onto local police, which is basically looking at the symptom rather than the cause of this problem, and talking about having better bulletproof windows or fewer doors, as Ted Cruz and Kevin McCarthy have rather really surreally kind of proposed, is simply symptomatic treatment. The fact is that we cannot shift the conversation away from the national level, where the American leadership for decades has allowed access to guns in ways that the constitutional framers never intended. They wrote very clearly, well regulated in the Second Amendment, and everybody has ignored that. This is a betrayal, no less, of the American people. Over 90% of Americans want to see some sort of background checks, for example. That's exactly what the Republicans are saying when they say guns don't kill, people kill. Regulate people who shouldn't have access to guns. We just shouldn't be having this conversation over and over.
Ed, I mean, how are you seeing
it? May I say something? I'm sorry.
Sorry, I will come back to you in one moment, Chris. Go ahead, Ed, and then I'll go to Chris.
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry.
No worries.
Look, I can't better what Dahlia said. I mean, we're in the UK. We had a discussion earlier on a lighthearted topic, which is American exceptionalism on metric versus imperial measures. This is American exceptionalism on a much more serious scale, which most of the rest of the world simply cannot get their heads around. You know, America is a peculiar place when it comes to gun laws. You can't drink in most American states until you're 21. The idea that you can go out and buy a semi-automatic rifle on your 18th birthday and go and kill 19 children is just incomprehensible to any of us in Europe. We had a shooting in the UK 24 years ago when children were shot by a man with a handgun, and we banned handguns ever since, and that's how you stop school shootings and mass shootings. And I completely agree with Dahlia. The idea this becomes a debate about how better to secure schools, the idea that any school in the UK would be thinking about anti-ballistic windows is just completely and utterly alien. I also agree with her on the Second Amendment. I was thinking about it the other day. The right to bear arms, for example, does not include the right to bear a rocket launcher, for example. There are clearly gradations of what is right to bear an arm. And the idea that you can bear a machine gun at the age of 18 is just for the birds. But I can't see, this is part of the culture war on a very serious level, and I can never see the Americans addressing.
Scalia would have disagreed with you. The late Justice Scalia had indicated in an interview that it was okay for individuals to bear rocket launchers.
And we know as well how heated this discussion gets when it comes to gun ownership, and then other arguments come out, such as arming police, arming teachers. Sorry, Chris, you also wanted to come in. Go ahead.
Very briefly, I do believe that there's a conversation to be had about the Second Amendment or about guns, and that's fine. But we can't have a binary discussion without discussing mental health. We can't have another discussion without talking about response. And I am not talking about hardening schools. I agree with you completely. What I am saying is we need to start hardening and understanding what happened. We haven't lost a child in a school fire in 63 years because we created this giant metric to respond and prevent fires. We can respond and prevent active shooters. 44.7% of every shooter since Sandy Hook, go backwards, since Columbine, has told somebody that they were going to be a shooter. And this person in Uvalde is no different. And Uvalde just joined all those other places, unfortunately. Welcome to it will never happen here. And then it does. So perhaps they weren't prepared to go in. Maybe the building had an error. Maybe there's human error. But if we don't want to end up on this television show in another debate or another tragic loss of life, we need to look at all of it. Guns, mental health, hardening schools, training citizens, and not necessarily arming citizens. I'm not saying disarm them. I am saying teach them common sense measures that if somebody comes in the back door firing a gun, leave out the front door. And 97% chance you're going to survive because you're not going to get shot. People run from guns. But it's more than run, hide, fight. We need to take a holistic look at this, and we can solve this problem. It's
an incredibly, incredibly sad problem, and I know such strong opinions when it comes to this issue. Chris-Grollnek, thanks so much for joining us on The Context. Right, let's turn to the UK. Data from the